recently the Cardinal came out with a new book. I've already read it. I had the original version here, which is actually one of the proofs. But this one he gave to me yesterday. It just was being on sale. I guess February 1st was the first day of it being on sale. He wrote this book with this type of thing in mind. He wanted to make sure that we could use it as an opportunity for renewal of who we are, an ongoing understanding of the faith, ongoing understanding of the liturgy itself and what takes place at Mass itself. And so it's really a beautiful book. I highly recommend it. It's very good. It's broken down in small chapters, extremely helpful in that sense. He breaks it. Not only does he talk about all of the vestments and the vessels and things like that we use, but also specifically the theology of the liturgy, the Mass that we gather for, the celebration of the Eucharist. And so it's very well done. And so I highly recommend it for especially catechists who will be working in parishes to help teach kids, because it can be broken down into small chapters, and you can teach a small chapter and then move on to something else, and then the next week you can come bring the kids back and utilize it in that way. And also, I guess there's a plug. There's a few people who were present in this room right now who are also in this book, so by picture. So okay. We'll finish there and we'll go to questions, okay? Yes, sir.
Father, before there's been some dialogue about the movement of the sign of peace, either to the beginning of the Mass or maybe to the end.
Correct.
What became of that?
The gentleman has asked a question about the sign of peace. There had been some discussion about the sign of peace may move in the liturgy, okay? And he's absolutely correct. There's been a lot of dialogue about it. The bishops have actually were requested. The Holy Father took that as a personal question for himself, okay, Benedict, and he sent out a request to all of the bishops' conferences around the world saying, where should the sign of peace be? And that's where we are at the moment. The bishops' conferences have sent back responses. I believe ours sent out the response last year, actually, sometime, which there's a philosophy on both sides of the sign of peace. Some like the idea of putting it before the offertory, before the gifts, the sign of peace, before we enter into the Eucharist itself, before the presence of Christ is there. So we all, the idea of going, if you remember of your grievance before you get to the altar, leave your gift at the altar and go. So that's kind of the general idea. But then there's also an argument for where the sign of peace is currently. There's a question about the issue of ascent, that the sign of peace is the last moment in which we have an opportunity to agree that everything that in a sense has come before, all the liturgy up until that moment has come before, is that moment in which we leave the gift at the altar, which is Christ himself, present at the altar. We turn and reconcile with one another, and then we receive Jesus. We receive him. So there's an argument that side too, that the ascent is everything that has come before. All that we've done, the readings, the homily, the Eucharistic prayer itself, all of that, I believe I assent to it. I agree to it and offer my sign of peace to all those around me, and then I enter into the presence of Jesus and myself individually with the very presence. So that's the argument back and forth. Some like it in front because they want it before the Eucharist, because it can turn into a liturgy of handshaking, backslapping, and greeting and things like that. But this is a teaching moment as well. Right now, the sign of peace in the current Missal of 2002, the Latin edition, and in the Roman Missal that comes out in English that we'll have at the end of this year, has the sign of peace where it currently is. So, again, it's an opportunity. We could speak to our people and say, it's not a time in which we greet one another as if we were gathering in the church, but it's a time in which we reconcile ourselves to each other prior to receiving the most precious gift that we have, which is on the altar. Okay? Yes, sir, way in the back.
Father, I heard a rumor basically for EMCs and lectors to be more detailed instruction on positioning of EMCs and lectors on the altar during certain parts of the Mass. Is that true, or are we remaining where we're supposed to be? How does that work?
That would probably be, the question that the gentleman just asked was about positioning of Eucharistic ministers, extraordinary ministers of the Eucharist, Holy Communion, and lectors and things like that in sanctuaries. Really what that is more of an individual issue within parishes, again, they're probably utilizing what you've heard is the opportunity to re-examine what each parish is doing in their parish, making sure that your procedures and things like that are the way they should be, as the church has asked, but also an opportunity with the changes coming that maybe perhaps we should re-examine how we do everything, since it will be one more thing attached to the changes, in a sense. So you're talking really, in a sense, about whether an extraordinary minister comes and stands at the side of the altar or behind the altar or in front of the altar to receive communion, right? Kind of thing. Yeah, that's up to the local pastors. That's architecture and everything else, depending on space. You know, you have some sanctuaries that are beautiful and large, and you have some that are very, very small, and it just depends. So you have to develop your procedures based on your parish. Way in the back.
Will we continue to use the New American Bible, or have they chosen a different version?
The lectionary, the version of the scriptures that we use, changed in 1999 with the new multiple volumes that we have now. That has not gone under any change that I know of. At the moment, they're sticking with that. This is part of the whole renewal, this, in a sense, the second part. What will be going next will be the rites themselves, which are referred to, would be like the baptismal rite, the marriage rite, the confirmation rite. There's also talk, most recently, that the breviary, the Liturgy of the Hours, will be revised. There has been a Psalter that has been approved, but nothing else. So there's questions of which one they're going to take first. My understanding is they wanted to go, actually marriage will be the next rite that's going to be on the ISIL block, in a sense, being worked on. But there's talk about the Liturgy of the Hours as well. The gentleman way in the back is a father. Sorry.
I'm glad that you anticipate that just 20% of people will never accept those changes. And this question has to do with this because there will be some people that could bring against the church, against priests who would continue, let's say, to say the older version because of the different regions, different parts of the United States. The question of validity of this Mass and sending the anonymous letters or the sign-up letters or making the factions, discussing whether saying the Mass in the old version is still valid, or does it make any difference whether you say old version, new version? How would you handle this thing? How would you address this?
Father's asking a question about the different versions of the utilizing the different versions of the Missal. Father, specifically, are you talking about the extraordinary form, or are you talking about the new version of the Missal versus the current Missal that we use now, the sacramentary?
Version of the Missal versus the old.
Right, it's cold turkey, basically. Okay, so November 27th of 2011, new volumes of which will no longer be known as the sacramentary, be referred to as the Roman Missal, will be used. So every parish, every chapel, every convent, every rectory will have to have a new Missal to be used. Okay, that is what's been promulgated by the USCCB under then President Cardinal George of Chicago. That is what's to be used. If another priest uses another version, that would be an issue that would have to take place within the diocesan structure. And granted, though, there has been no, in a sense, guidance that's come from the USCCB on the issue of perhaps older priests, the ones who are very, very used to it, the older version. But it's basically cold turkey. Start with the new version. The same thing happened with the lectionary. Do you stop someone? I mean, occasionally an old lectionary might show up in some setting. You can certainly still utilize the readings themselves for an understanding to pray with and things like that. But the ones that should be used at a public ceremony or a public mass should be the ones, or the proper books that are being promulgated by the diocese.
You mentioned the marriage, baptism, confirmation. What will we be doing in the meantime? Because the Lord be with you as
You follow the rite.
you follow the rite.
Right.
Even
You
though
follow
the responses of
some of the responses the people will start. Well, once they start learning them, they'll start going back with you, saying, "And with your spirit." Okay, that's fine. That's one of the reasons why the rite has to be revised soon. But And it won't take as long as the Roman Missal, that's for sure, because it's certainly they're just revising some of the very smaller prayers. So those rites will be coming out. But even, as you know, when the Holy Father came out in 2007, when he with his motu proprio on the extraordinary form of the Mass, the Old Trinitine Mass, he allowed for to be said around the world, rather than without an indult, any priest could say it. He also said in that you would follow the rites that were available. And the rites of 1962, they're actually revised in 1958. The ones, so if someone wanted to be baptized under the old version, for instance, it would be from a 1958 rite, not the 1962 Missal, in a sense. So you would utilize whatever baptismal rite you have until they promulgate a new one. Yes.
Well, I think the new translation is really beautiful, the wording, and look forward to its implementation. But you mentioned there wouldn't be any changes to the Lord's Prayer. And something that's always troubled me in the wording is that, and lead us not into temptation, the concept that God would lead one of his children into temptation. Would that be an example, in your opinion, of a mistranslation?
I would have to go back and just check the exact Latin on it, but I could talk to you offline on that. The question was about the Our Father.
It's actually, the issue was that the St. Jerome's translation of the prayer, way back in the 5th century, was incorrect. Because what we say, and lead us not into temptation, is exactly a translation of the Latin. But the Latin is wrong. And what's really interesting is that in modern languages, in Spanish, they say, do not let us fall into temptation.
Right.
No nos deja caer, which I always thought was rather interesting. Why is it that they have done that?
Right.
In the English, there has been no accommodation. And the other thing that I wanted to say about that is, why is it, are they still going to keep on with this thee and thou stuff? We're doing all of this translation and all of this updating. Why are we still saying that? I can't understand it at all.
Well,
I had heard that there was going to be some addressing of this problem with the Our Father.
Well, but they didn't change it in the current structure. So what we have is what we have, okay, for one. Now, but again, I would just refer you back to the whole idea of philosophy, of translation. Also, when they were going to come up with the translations, not only did they look at the current version and how it should be translated, they also looked back to many, many other documentation, a lot of other prayers. They went back to a lot of different resources to cull, in a sense, to pull up prayers that had been used in the past as well. So that's why sometimes there's a reference to, well, this was used in 1966. But they're also using things from long time before. When they adjusted the Missal for Vatican II, they brought out a number of the anaphoras, the Eucharistic prayers that were from elsewhere. Like, for instance, Eucharistic Prayer 4 was as part of St. Basil's prayer. Okay, so there's plenty of change that's going to come as well. There's probably a lot of re-examination that also will take place. But the fact is, it took a long time to get where they are. There are, of course, it's not a perfect document, but it is what we will have, and that's what we'll use until they come around. Now, and there's hope. You never know. You can always hope. Hope springs eternal. You know, sometimes there were 200 years between the promulgation of the next version, and sometimes there were 30 years. So you saw the list in the other versions of the various Roman Missals. So, Mark.
I want to ask you, it seems the most fundamental thing that change will be what people say, and with your spirit. I was just wondering, how do you explain, like, what are we saying when we say, and with your spirit? Is it a reference to the Holy Spirit, Jesus being within all of us, or?
And with you are, that you are more than just a individual body standing there, that you are also body, soul, okay? Body, mind, and soul. So the recognition of you doesn't quite carry it, but when one says with your spirit, it really says something quite special, doesn't it? To who you are, not just an individual standing there that I don't care about, but an individual who has a mind and a body, a dignity, and life with Christ. And that's why we say, and with your spirit. Yes?
Well, thanks. I think the new translations are great, but since we mentioned the kind of missed opportunities, one thing that's been on my mind, I wonder did they address this in the creed, the translation of anthropos homo as man, which I think is man. Maybe in the past it was considered an all-encompassing term for humankind, but if people are thinking it's a male, which a lot of people do, that's a misinterpretation of what homo or anthropos really means. And you know, the Gloria does translate it as people, hominibus, so I'm just wondering, I'm sure they did address this, so why did they not take the chance to change it?
That I don't know, but it's probably based on the fact that the structure of the whole process that they had for translation, that you had multiple people doing multiple tasks, similar tasks, then coming together and putting it together, reading it out loud, adjusting it, adapting it, making suggestions, and then voting on it. So you had a committee of people, and when you have a committee, sometimes it's not always perfect, but also an individual can also make a lot of mistakes as well. An individual then has sort of a narrow thought line or narrow ability to translate something. So again, it's not a perfect thing. However, it is what we have. It was based on a lot of time, effort, thought put into it. It was not done lightly or quickly. It was done over a period of time. It's the best that we have, and it's the best that we can use. Will it solve all of our problems in a sense with translation? No. But it certainly is an improvement in some ways. Yes, it goes back in a different way sometimes. And yes, it doesn't address all of the issues that could be addressed. However, it does address many of them. And Tony Sherman, who I know very well because we worked together on the papal liturgy here in 2008, he said that he was at an audience with the Holy Father, when the Holy Father, just a couple of years ago now, and he was introduced, and he told us the story as priests. All of us were also gathered, but he told it to me privately. And he said that he was introduced to the Holy Father as the gentleman who's in charge of the USCCB's Divine Worship Committee and the executive director. And the Holy Father greeted him, shook his hand, and said, Monsignor, you must have the Roman Missal done. Told him that. And he had a little conversation because Monsignor Sherman studied at a same institution that the Holy Father did when he was a young seminarian. And he started to try to change the subject by talking about their allegiance to the same school. And the Holy Father was very pleasant and discussed their school together, and then responded ultimately saying, but Monsignor, remember, the Roman Missal must be done. So it's time. It's really time for us to move on. So, any other questions? Well, thank you all so much. Appreciate your time. Thank you, and God bless.